a lot as well, that if we're preparing and we're diligent, we'll do well, and we got to be accountable. And if not, we also have to be accountable for not doing well when it comes time to be judged of our assignments.
No, that's good. Okay, we are starting the broadcast. This is B483 Group 7, the Andreesen Horowitz case discussion. So I don't know what you guys' backgrounds are. I mean, we're obviously must be all getting close to graduating because there's not really a class after this. But I don't have a lot of investment. I haven't really studied that a lot. So I don't know if you guys had a better, you guys might have a better take on this case. So the question is, so far we've learned to evaluate business models of startups. Today we're going to examine the business model of a startup in a mature industry. And so this is the question. Was the venture capital industry attractive for A16Z to enter in 2009? What was the competition like? What was the typical fate of the new entrants in this industry? Why was this so? What were the trends in venture capital fund performance during this time? So if any of you have like a good background on investments, this would be helpful. So what did you think the market was kind of like for venture capitalist firms at this time?
Well, in the case, it was saying that the main, like all the good business, the good venture flow went to, I think, the top like 5 companies. So anyone under that wasn't one of those kind of plodded along, but didn't really have good business. They didn't do very well. And so as someone entering that, it wouldn't be the likelihood of success would not be very good for a new company entering into that market because it was dominated by like the top 5 firms. So
right.
Yeah, I noticed this. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was done.
Okay. I was noticing that one of the terms that was used in the case was that the industry was in contraction. And so it was really shrinking. And the numbers that it gave us was really interesting because it says 40% of the companies fail, 40% just barely make it, and only 20% or less had any high returns. And even then, they were relying on only 10% of their portfolio to make those high amounts, and really 90% was really not doing anything for them. So I think it would have been really scary to try and enter this market at that time, but they had an interesting take and spin on what they could do that was different, that made the difference.
Wow, I agree with both of you. I was really interested in their backgrounds because, like you said, only the top few percent of the VC firms made money, and it was pretty much controlled by, so to be a new underdog coming into that market would be pretty intimidating. But if you looked more at their backgrounds, oh my goodness, like Andreesen, I found out like he's the one that started Netscape. I mean, they just had these amazing backgrounds. So I think they had the confidence to come in with this business model. And so let's just like talk about their business model and how it was different from the other venture capitalist funds, like firms. Like what was, I think I found this in the reading, their whole point was to like literally disrupt the traditional model. Like they were going to totally change it. So let's talk about how they did that. What did they do different?
Well, their whole value proposition to the customers was unique because they were, as you said, they were kind of trying to revamp the entire industry and disrupt the entire industry. And so they made their entire value proposition about networking. Yes, we can provide you with money, but more importantly than that almost is we're going to provide you with the connections that you need to make your business venture successful. And so they obviously didn't have the data to support it, but I'd imagine under that kind of value proposition business format that the people who came to them for funding would be more likely, their businesses would be more likely to succeed because they have more cards kind of stacked in their favor.
Yeah, that's perfect. Jen, what do you think?
Well, I thought it was interesting how the old companies, it was a very linear kind of relationship. And you had one person at the VC company that was representing that entire company with the startup. And so whatever skills that one person had, that's what that one person had to help you succeed. Yet with this format of the networking, they had a whole range of people that they could use as advisors. And there was just such a wealth of information and a wealth of experience and knowledge that these newcomers could draw on. And even people who've been in the industry for a long time could still draw on it. And this whole networking thing, for a long time, I had a bad attitude about networking. It just seemed like people were schmoozers and using people on networking, and I had this bad connotation to it. But the way that they did it, and the way I've learned, to properly do it, is to open yourself up. And that's what they did, is they opened themselves up for people to see what they were doing and sharing information, and then waiting for that return to come back. And I think because they were open and honest about it, it flowed many directions, and not just them running the industry.
Right. That's actually, I was just looking at my notes, and what you just described was one thing I really liked. Was they said their goal was to transcend transactional relationships, which is networking, meaning they might make a connection with somebody that's not going to really help them today on this certain, project, but in the future that person's going to be there. And I really like the way they their whole idea with the startups. It wasn't like they're going to babysit them. In fact, they said, we're not training wheels for startups. We don't do things for them that they can do for themselves. We don't hire from them. We don't run their PR. We don't, help them with fundraising, but we're going to connect them with everybody. We're going to plug them into this network that we've created that's going to help them do that. So in that way, it was kind of like, I saw it kind of like as a delegating, as opposed to the old VC model, which was, here's your guy, and this is your only guy. And this one just spread out all the information and brought in so many other different people with different backgrounds. So I really thought, to answer and to finish this question, that even though, it was a tough market, their business model was so likely and so matched for this opportunity.
I liked that they focused on respect of those startup founders. I mean, these people are not dumb, and many of them have done them many times and had great ideas. And so to respect their ideas, their skills, their experience, and work with them, instead of just kind of, a lot of them just kind of were ignored and weren't taken seriously. And I think as a business person, especially if I had this great idea and I was experienced, to be treated rudely by someone who I wanted to invest in my company would be a real turnoff. And I'd rather not do it with you than be treated that way. And so I think they were able to pull in a lot more business just because they were nice.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Oh, go ahead,
I
Vicki.
think a lot of that came from where they approached the problem too, because they had started off being on the CEO side of I'm trying to get my business up and running, whereas most venture capitalists to that point hadn't done that. And so they didn't truly understand what was needed. And so they were able to go, well, here are all these needs that aren't being fulfilled by current venture capitalists. How could we fill those needs? Which I think partially also goes a long way towards, they were just being nice to these people because they had the understanding to make them compassionate, which went a long way.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And going along with that, I like that they, when they were out trying to get funding, when they were startups, they did not want to give over control of their company to the investors. And that's what seemed to always happen. And so their thing was, you're the one that started, you stay on as the CEO. We're not going to bring in some new CEO. You are the startup person. You're going to be the CEO. And I think that was big, because when people have an idea, it's like a baby, they don't want to give up control of that baby. So, yeah. Let's see, we've kind of answered that. Says, why is A6Z specifically targeting first-time technical founders? How has it impacted the need for technical co-founders to raise capital? Do you see trends in these sectors as opposed to like life science or clean tech? What choices do technical founders have for financing that they didn't have a decade before? So this question is basically focusing on people who are raising money for startups. Tech. So any thoughts on that?
Well, I think
I know that was a lot of questions.
I think part of it goes back to their experience personally, because they were in the tech business. So they had kind of the know-how of this is what they need, this is what's going on. They knew a lot of people, so they already had a large network of different experts in different areas in that industry to kind of give guidance and counsel and additional insights, which ultimately I think helped because they understood the way that new tech startups needed to receive funding. So they were able to be like, no, you don't need this quite now, wait a little bit, and then we can help you give it when you actually do need it, so you aren't taking it too early, which happened with the previous case where he got his funding too early and then kind of floundered with that. So they'd be able to help kind of give that counsel and guidance to be like, well, we're going to have you wait a little bit, which would help a lot as well.
Oh, that's good. Jen, what do you think?
Well, I think part of the question was, why are they going to first-time co-founders? You know, where they're trying to change everything and they're doing it a new way. This is new to those new companies and it's a new experience for them. And I think the way the market had been going, or the way the industry had been going before, was just kind of par for the course. Okay, you have an idea, you get it started, you sell it to the venture capitalist, you move on to the next one, and they're entrenched in this idea. But I think Becky said, you know, these people are attached to their ideas where the old timers were not. So.
Yeah, I like what you said, that because they did have the technical background, they are the perfect people, you know, to connect with these first-time people. And if they're first time, that maybe they're, you know, they don't have to do it the old way. So I like what everybody said about that.
I also
go ahead.
I also think it was interesting how they provided the really long list of, here are all these tech companies who started up, like, or kind of a first go at it, who kept their own CEO, like the founder was the CEO. And it's just like the way that the current industry, the VC industry, is trying to force on these people isn't the way that it's been successful in the past. Like if you look at Bill Gates, you know, his initial idea wasn't his end all, this is where it's stopping. I think it also kind of comes into the fact that the technology industry at that time, it's a compounding thing. You can have one great idea, but you can continue to adapt it and continue to make it grow, where some industries don't work that way, where it's like, oh, you have this idea and then that idea is kind of done until you have to go find another one.
Right. And I like how you brought that up, because in the technology industry, it's like that. Your idea that you have right now in 5 years probably is going to be obsolete. So when you have those quality of people with that kind of entrepreneurial thinking, they're going to, you know, they're not just going to have one great idea. They're going to have a lot of great ideas, like you said, that are going to build. Okay. Anything else anybody wants to say about that part of the questions? Okay, we'll move on.
Did it ask about?
Go ahead.
Did it ask about types of funding in that question that we didn't talk about?
Yes.
Let's see. What choices did technical founders have for financing that they didn't have a decade before? Oh, I just saw that in
the case they talked about crowdfunding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which was a completely new concept. You know, who would have thought that anybody would be interested in doing that? Yet it has taken off like crazy and really successful. And these new people know that that's there. You know, it's the same kind of thing where you've got the new crowd coming in that they may not be experienced, but they know a lot more than what they get credit for.
Mm-hmm.
Right. No, that's a good idea. I forgot about the crowdfunding. Okay, in going on, it talks about for a venture capital firm to compete, they have to be able to source, pick, and win. So how does A16Z's business model influence their ability to do this compared to the old style VC firms? So if we talk about source, let's just start with one. If we talk about source, how is it that A16Z can do this better or different or more efficiently than the old style VC firms? And the source is like the ability to actually get the funders, you know, to come in the door seeking money. So how did they do this differently?
Well, they're looking for founders. They're looking for new startups. And I thought it was interesting that they said they don't want just whatever, you know, this looks okay, you know, you can prove that it's fine. They want one of the partners to be banging on the table and really be saying, this is going to be a great idea. Yeah, that one of the partners needs to be passionate about it, that they've got to say, this is what we absolutely have to do. And there might be problems in that company, but there was something of value, something, maybe even a gut decision of one of their partners that made it stand out. There was some point. And because of the way they have it set up with the network, those risks or those areas where it might not be a good idea, they had enough people to help develop that the one point was enough to make it worthwhile, to make it worth the risk.
I also
Right.
I also think it was interesting how they hired a brand manager for their company, and they actually advertised, which was not done at all in the VC industry.
That was not considered cool by the old VC people.
And when they started doing it, the other companies, the other firms were just like, what are you doing? This is not done. But doing that, like, the response from the people seeking investment was like huge. They loved it. They wanted to know who they were getting their money from. They wanted it to be from someone who's worthwhile, who knew what they were doing. And you can't know that unless you're out there branding yourself. And so I think that was a really unique way that worked well for them with what their kind of firm's mission statement was, being like, we're here to help the people who are just starting out, who have that great idea. We're here to help them make it work. And once people knew that, it was kind of like, oh, well, I want to go to that place. They are passionate about my passions. So that brought in a lot more people than I think it would have if they hadn't done that.
I agree. And we've already talked a little bit about how they treated everybody different, as opposed to, when people did come and sought funds from them. The old method was more like I don't want to call it begging, but it was almost like they had to beg. And this method was like, no, man, we want to help you. We want to give you money. So I really think changing that perspective of begging, being a startup, having to beg for money, as opposed to their method, their business model of just working with them more and treating them with respect. I think that probably, and the branding, like they weren't afraid to put themselves out there and say, yeah, here we are. I think that really, as far as source, more people in the door, which leads to the next thing is.
Well, just a minute before we move on, because I don't think that this format would work without the culture within the A16Z. And that was the lack of competition between each other for their additional pay, because they didn't keep secrets from anybody. They weren't hiding new founders in order to get the percent, their percent of what they've brought in, and their ability to make the success of their coworker be their own success is what made this actually work. If they did the linear kind and they weren't open, there's no way that this would work.
Then you would have everybody fighting for, a specific project and taking all the credit. And that's exactly what they're not about. Do you know, they're about credit, the whole network idea, sharing everything. So
and if they saw something in one of the other partners' business and they knew how to fix it, then they would say, hey, have you thought of this idea and put that into play? Where before, and in the old VCs, you wouldn't do that because you honestly wouldn't want to see your coworker succeed, which is unfortunate and seems strange, but
it does.
It's the way it was.
So the next question along this line is, how would this or will this change if AC16 begins to fire CEOs because they're not performing well? Will this increase, decrease, or have no effect on potential deals that A16Z sees compared to the competition? So I'm just going to throw this out here, but my first thought is then if they start doing that, then they are just going back to the old model. But what do you guys?
I agree with that completely, because their entire kind of value proposition is we are going to help you make it work. And if then they're like, well, you aren't making it work, let's replace you, that kind of undermines their initial statement. So then that person would go out and be like, hey, they aren't actually doing this. And that would kind of destroy like a whole new group of people who would have come to them. They're like, oh, well, no, I don't want them to tell me I can't continue being the CEO, even if I make a mistake. Like, this is my first time. I'm going to make mistakes. That's just the way it's going to be.
I think that their process weeds out the CEOs that aren't going to perform. Not that that it weeds out people who aren't going to make mistakes. Like Becky said, of course you're going to, but it will weed out the ones who are wishy-washy. I don't think that they would sign them on to begin with.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree. I think they had such a gut instinct because they had been through the process. And if I had to pick one thing that differentiated them between the way they did it and the way the old model did it, is that they'd been there and done that. And so they could, I think they had just a gut instinct for people to be able to pick startups that were going to be successful and to pick people that let them be the CEO of their project. Okay, the other question, how does the operating team help a C16Z source pick, a C16 source pick and win? Does it increase the odds of getting more high quality deals? If so, does it affect their ability to pick winners? Does it actually have any impact on the odds of success for their portfolio companies? If so, why? If not, what do you think about that? That's a lot of stuff. So I don't know if you guys have these questions in front of you, but we might have to. I guess when he's talking about the operating team, I remember that when they, the operating team within their whole, within their own company, I remember they said, first it has to be scalable, meaning if you have these professionals that are going to coach their portfolio companies, they, you know, they're going to need some staff to do that. But I also liked, they talked about how they would only hire people for their firm, not for the startups that had already done a startup. So did I read that wrong? Okay. Somebody else share their thoughts while I try to find what I'm looking for.
Yeah, it's scalable was one of them, and then it needed to have a multi-sided platform.
There it is. That's
and then
it.
It's on page 9, I think, that you're referring to.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we've already talked about a lot of what this question was asking. It's kind of the same, you know, we're rehashing the same thing.
Yeah, kind of talking about how the way that their operating team works, that it's all network based, that the way they screen people out is based on like how passionate like they are, how well it's been planned out. I think we've kind of talked about how that will increase the odds of success in the portfolios they pick, because they're picking the people who have the backbone and the vision to do it, and they're giving them the network to help make it happen. And I think that will help them all be more profitable in the long run.
Right. So I think we've answered that in that is in doing that actually increases their odds of success in picking portfolio companies that are going to be successful. Okay, it says, put yourself in the shoes of Andreesen and Horowitz. You must decide whether or not to seek to double your assets under management. So we're supposed to vote, and our decision has to be unanimous. They said before we vote, we have to think, how many portfolio companies can one general partner reasonably support? Are there any I can't even say that, economies of scale in this business? You have to hire more operating team people if actually make more money for doubling their assets, or will their additional profits go to hiring more people? So I totally, when I already wrote my report, I totally kind of got off on the wrong track, because I actually, and I didn't know this until I went and took the little pre-vote thing. And I put on, and my idea was that I didn't think that they should expand geographically or into other sectors. And so when I went and took the prep thing, it only gave me those two options. Yeah. So what, you're laughing at me.
Well, the same thing kind of happened to me, where like here, when it phrases the question, it's saying, do you think they should expand or do you think they shouldn't? And then the question was, which way are they going to expand? And you're like, that wasn't the decision I came to. So no, I agree.
So what decision did you come to? Like what?
I think they should expand geographically, personally.
But stay in the tech industry?
Mostly because since it is so network-based, there's a lot more room to expand. Like, say they, not even to New York, which that said they already had a few connections into New York, but like up to Seattle, where there's a huge tech industry.
Yeah. That's funny. I thought of that.
And I live in the Seattle area, so that's obviously what comes to my mind first. But you can make an even bigger and better network for the industry that you already have, like a great platform to do. And so if you were to expand and say, okay, we're going to open up an office in Seattle, even though you'd still be working on building networking in Seattle, you've already got a ton of networking in like the Bay Area to like send people down there too. So it just kind of increases the rollover of information. So it's not localized geographically, where it could potentially be limited that way. And
I'm in agreement with Becky, and I had said in my analysis that they should expand geographically, but not expand into like the biotech and whatnot.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's easier to grow something that you know than to start into a whole new industry that there's so many details and so many nuances of those industries that it would be really hard to develop the network and know who really knew what was going on. But I also thought too that with communication abilities nowadays, you could be anywhere in the world, and you might have a startup that prefers to live in Montana because they like the atmosphere of living there, but they're still just as smart, and it's cheaper to live there. It's cheaper to work there. And just like we are communicating with each other really with not much problem once we get our schedule figured out, with really no problem at all, we can have this face-to-face conversation and learn from one another that really the distance and the geography doesn't matter. And it will be appealing to startups that think, oh, I can't afford to go and live in San Francisco, or I can't afford to live in Seattle, but I have this great idea and I am really smart and I can do this. They could be anywhere.
mm-hmm.
I totally agree with you. And after I'd already submitted my paper and then I saw that, even in my paper, I was like, I was leaning towards, hey, they're already the darlings of Silicon Valley. They already know tech. So stay with tech and use, the technical advances that we have to spread it that way, because that's where all their connections are tech oriented. So to stay in the tech industry made way more sense than to spread out into, I think, and I don't even know what clean tech is, but biotech, clean tech, to spread out to that, I think would be to diversify. And I don't know, did any of you run I did not run the bonus model. Did anybody do that?
I wanted to, but no matter how many times I read it, I think because I'm not familiar enough with how venture capitalist companies work, I could not figure out how to make the problem work. So I was going to ask you guys if you had figured it out so you could help me learn, because I was just sitting there and making myself so angry because it's like, I don't understand how to do this.
Well, I did the same thing.
Excel spreadsheet, but I was like, okay, I'm going to put this in an Excel spreadsheet. And I actually usually do that for most of my case studies. I almost always put in some sort of Excel spreadsheet because I really like Excel and I think it makes the numbers clear. But as I was looking at this, I didn't understand a lot of the investment terminology. So I'm kind of hoping that he normally leaves a little link where you can go and watch the video of how to set up the model. And I was hoping, I actually wished he would have done that, because I would have liked to have seen how this worked. So
maybe we can leave him some feedback.
Okay.
Like, can we record
that we really want to see
afterwards? Because I want to understand how to do this.
Right.
Is Casey, is her emphasis on finance, or is she in the
entrepreneurial management major? Yeah.
Okay.
So
that's what I am. Is that where you are?
No, I'm actually. Go ahead, Becky.
I'm supply chain and marketing, both of which I've actually finished already. So.
Oh, wow. So are you graduating this semester?
So this class is replacing my capstone, which they aren't offering this semester.
Right. So. Me too. Jen, how about you? What are you majoring in?
The entrepreneurial emphasis. And this is my last semester. This is my very last class. And I had already taken what was replacing what they dropped. So I only have this one class this time.
Nice.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Yeah. That's why I said my schedule is usually flexible, even though I was the difficult one this week.
Oh, you were difficult. So, hey, I looked ahead for next week, and I think I only saw one. There's only one case study next week called Genapsis. Yeah, I only saw one case study. So if we could just set a time for next week, I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast. Unless you guys want to do like a little wrap up.
He likes us to and put the timestamp on it, so then he doesn't have to watch the whole conversation.
Yeah. Right. And so if we we'll start our summary right now. We'll go around. Becky, let's start with you and go around and just to summarize what we thought about the case.
Okay. So to start off our summary, I think we kind of came to the conclusion that the best idea was to expand geographically, that they have the capacity to expand. They would need to hire probably more GPs and would probably want to open up a new office in a new city, which might decrease the income for the current GPs for a year or two, but would then bring in more profit afterwards. But that way they'd be able to continue to expand their current network in a way that would lead to higher return on investment rather than trying to start from the ground up again in a new place. Is that about right?
Okay. Yeah. Jen, how about your summary?
Yeah, I agree with everything Becky said. And I think what it comes down to and the success of this company is their respect of other people. That they put people first before they put the profits. And because they did that, the profits followed. And that's a pattern that we would do well to remember that in everything that we do, not just in business, but in our life as well.
Thank you. I actually like your application of actually a gospel principle in that. So my summary would be, they already found this model that was unique to this industry. They made it work. And so I feel like if they stick with this model, even if they expand, if they stay within that tech industry for right now, that this model, can be expanded. And I think Jen brought up, even though they were a little concerned about, could they still maintain their communications, can they still handle all this? I think bringing up the whole that, you can be all over the world and still have, good communications. So I think that by just expanding, and I liked Becky's idea of going to Seattle, and then I also like Jen's idea of you could be anywhere. So I think that to go ahead and expand, if they stick to their model and if they stick to the way they've been treating people so far, I think that they're going to be highly successful. So that ends our broadcast.